Hello and welcome to this instructional video for polyblock printing with Printfest Ulverston. This video is to be used in schools, so feel free to use it during a lesson, pausing it as we go along. Polyblock printing is a really good, easy way of doing relief printing in the classroom. I've got today some of this print foam. You can get some other materials actually called polyblock or polystyrene block. This one that I've got is quite thick. Now that could be good for younger children because it's much harder to break. But if you're wanting to cut out shapes from the polystyrene, a thinner sheet might be better because you can actually cut it using scissors. So I've got my polyblock. The other things that I'm going to need are a roller, a rolling tray. This will be handy for keeping your area clean and tidy, and some block printing inks. And these are red, a yellow and a blue block printing ink. Absolutely perfect. If you've got a white and a black as well, that can just help you with mixing a wider range of colours. You're going to need to know what you're going to make your print of, so you can make some initial preparatory drawings based on the theme that you're studying in lesson. I've got a quick sketch of a leaf here which I am going to print. You will also need a tracing of your drawing on tracing paper. So here I have my drawing and a tracing of the image. Both pieces of paper, both my paper that I've drawn onto and my tracing paper, are exactly the same size as my piece of polyblock, and this is also important. So the first thing we need to do is transfer the image that I've drawn onto my piece of polyblock. So to do that, I'm going to take my tracing. I would like my print to print the same way round as my initial drawing. There can be a problem with the image flipping. The best way to deal with this is when you trace your drawing, and so this is a direct trace of my drawing, you take your tracing paper and you flip it over so it goes upside down on top of your piece of polyblock. This will mean that when you print the image, it will flip again and end up the same way round as your drawing. This matters particularly if you're going to use letters or writing in your work. I'm going to put my drawing to one side, I don't need that anymore. I flipped over my piece of tracing paper and that is on top of my piece of foam board. You might want to use a little bit of tape to hold it in place. That can be helpful. I'm going to draw over the top of my tracing onto my polyblock using a biro pen. And I'm not going to press on too hard, but I'm going to apply enough pressure so that I can see a slight indentation on the surface of the polyblock. So I'm going to go carefully over my whole drawing, pressing down firmly but not hard to trace the whole image. I will see you back here when I've just done this. Okay, when you've done that, and you can use a pencil, a sharp pencil, it's just that with the biro it has a better amount of pressure to just indent the surface of the polyblock. So I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but there is a slight indentation on my polyblock now. So what I want to do is I want to make valleys in the in the polyblock and leave mountains. And the mountains, the raised areas, are the areas where the ink will go, and they are the areas that will print. To make my valleys, I need to add pressure to the polyblock. I need to compress it so there are areas that dip down. So I'm going to take my pen again, or again you can do it with pencil, or any blunt tool is absolutely fine, just to press into the surface of the polyblock. And I'm actually going to do the whole outline again. So I'm going to go over it again, pressing down a little bit harder. And you actually want to hear the polyblock ripping. So as I do this, let's see if we can hear it. Hear that noise? I'm actually breaking the surface of the polyblock, and I think you should be able to see for that little bit there that I've got now valley areas that dip in on the polyblock. So I'm going to do this, and it can help to just do little movements like that and go over your lines and make sure they really are compressed and that the surface of the polyblock really has broken. I'm going to do this for the whole block and then I'll come back to you. So now I've pressed my whole design into the polyblock, creating valleys all over it. It was quite difficult to do some lines, making them go exactly as I wanted them to. So don't worry if yours have gone a little bit wobbly. It will add to the quality of your print and make it look like it's been sketched. So now we're going to print our first colour, or our only colour if this is where you want to stop. You can print multiple colours. I'm actually in this video going to show you how to print this in 3 colours, gradually taking away more of the polyblock each time, and that's a proper reduction, what we call a reduction print. You reduce the plate every time you print it. But if you want to just stop at this level, that's absolutely fine. What you might want to consider if you're only going to do one colour is putting more detail into your drawing. So you might want to add dots into the background or little details onto areas of your drawing if you're only going to print in one colour. Okay, to print, I'm going to move my tracing paper out of the way. I don't need that anymore. I only need my polyblock, and first of all I need to prepare my ink. I'm going to prepare my ink in a roller tray. This is the best way to contain the ink and to keep my working area nice and clean and tidy. I've got an apron on to protect my clothes, and I'm going to pull my sleeves up and get those out of the way too. So if you haven't done that already, that might be a good idea now. I'm also going to need some paper to print on too, so you need to get some paper ready. The paper should be bigger than your printing block. So for this size printing block, which is A5, I would suggest having some A4 paper ready to print on. So I'm going to prepare my ink. You really don't need a lot. You've only got a small roller tray for this, so just bear that in mind. You're going to want to mix your colours up and cover your roller in ink. So I've got a reasonable amount of ink in my roller tray, but not loads. So here with my paintbrush, I am going to just mix my colours up in my roller tray and check I've got the right colour, the colour that I want to print with. And it's probably a bit too pink for what I'm wanting to achieve, so I'm going to add a little bit more white. And what I might do here is over here mix the colour. And that's probably closer to what I wanted, maybe slightly darker, so I'll add a bit more of that pink. Once I'm happy with the colour that I've mixed, I'm going to move it down into the centre of my tray. And this is the ink that I'm going to use to put all over my roller. And I leave my paintbrush there. So with my roller, now what I want to do is cover the whole surface of this roller with quite a decent layer of ink, not too thin. So I'm going to see how I go with this. I'm going to roller in different directions. Notice how I'm rollering that way and making sure my roller turns all the way round, and then I'm rollering this way. And again, making sure my roller makes a full rotation. That sound is perfect. That sound means we've got a good amount of ink in the tray. I can also tell by looking at my roller, I can see it's slightly textured. So I'll put my roller tray to one side. My roller is covered in ink. I am now going to apply the ink to my piece of polyblock. Being very careful, I'm going to roller in one direction over my polyblock, and then I'm going to get a bit more ink and roller again, making sure the whole thing, all the raised areas, all the mountains on my polyblock are covered with ink. Going right up to the corners. And I bet you're thinking, why is she doing it pink? Leaves aren't pink. You will see. So really take your time over this, ensuring the whole polyblock is totally covered in ink. When you don't need your roller anymore, they have a handy stand on them, most of these rollers. Just turn it upside down so that stand is on your desk and we haven't got all that ink getting all over the table. Then I'm going to take my piece of paper and I'm going to place it over the top of my polyblock so that my polyblock is in the middle of the piece of paper. So I'm just going to check that with my fingers there, and I'm going to place it down. Once you've placed it down, don't move it, don't slide it, because your whole image will slide and smudge. So you need to place it down, then be firm. Stick it down with your hand. The ink will make the paper stick to the polyblock. Then I'm going to apply pressure to the back of your piece of paper, and you need to be quite firm with this, but not too heavy-handed. You don't want to compress any of your polyblock. You just want to make sure that the ink comes off the polyblock, goes onto the piece of paper. You can lift up a corner to check how well it's printing, and if you need to, just make sure you rub right into the corners and all round the edges, and even pressure all over the back. Nice firm pressure. But just use your hand to do this. Anything else may make an indent on the polyblock surface, and we don't want that. Carefully peel your paper from the polyblock and you can have a look at your print. So you can notice that everywhere that you drew a line has printed white, and because they're the valleys, so they don't print. And everywhere else that was raised, which is the mountains, has printed in pink. Now a couple of things might happen here. So you might not have put enough ink onto your piece of polyblock, and you might find that the ink comes out textured like this. That doesn't matter a lot. You could try doing a second print, inking up, just making sure you've got a bit more ink on for the second time. Or if you quite like that texture and you're going to put other colours on top, it maybe doesn't matter. The other thing that might have happened is you might have got ink into the valleys if you had too much ink on your roller. If you got ink into the valleys, you might find it prints something a bit like these dots here have printed, where there's colour actually where there shouldn't be, where you've applied pressure to the surface of your printing block. And this doesn't matter too much either. Right, at this stage you need to wash your polyblock. Just do this with a damp cloth. Try not to submerge it in water, try to just wipe the surface. And I'll see you back here and we can put more indents in and print another colour over the top. So I've wiped clean my polyblock plate. I just did it with a damp cloth, no soap needed, and then I dried it off with a dry cloth. What we need to do now is take away any areas on our printing plate, on our polyblock, on our picture, that we want to stay pink. This is how we do a reduction. We keep taking away and adding more ink to our image, but gradually to smaller and smaller areas. So I am actually going to want my leaf to be green. So I'm going to work into the areas that I want to stay pink. And for me, this is my background. You can do this in a number of ways. If you've got a thinner piece of polyblock, you could actually just cut off the background so that you had two separate pieces. So this is a thinner polyblock, but this is much more delicate. So actually, it's thicker stuff can be better. But you could actually cut a piece out so they were separate. You might need to use a craft knife to do that if you wanted it to come out like that and leaving the background whole, or you could use a pair of scissors if you just wanted to take the background away. With this thicker stuff, probably better to just make indents into it and compress it so that the ink doesn't sit on those areas. So I'm going to use the end of my pencil to press down into the polyblock so that I get larger areas rather than just a line. I want blocks of it to disappear. So for all of this background, I'm going to use this bit of my pencil and should be able to hear that noise of it being compressed. Okay, so once you've managed to indent all of the areas that you don't want to print again, which I've done by pressing the end of my pencil into all of my background, then we can ink up our printing plate again. So I've mixed a colour. This time I've mixed green in my printing tray, in my ink tray, and I've covered my roller completely in a good thick layer of ink. And when you've done that and you're ready to go, you can add the ink to the raised areas of your printing plate. So this should be everywhere that you've not just tried to indent. Now some of the background, some of the texture may get ink on it. So I can see my background texture is picking up a little bit of ink because it's not totally gone away. And that's fine, it's quite a nice aspect of reduction printing, as you can kind of see where you've carved or where you've taken away. Because you're going to try and print over the top of another colour, you do want a nice thick application of ink here. Okay, and then we're going to put our roller down using that stand. Okay, so this time we're going to do it slightly differently because we want our printing block to land exactly on top of our print from last time, so that our leaf, my leaf, goes in exactly the same place. So I'm going to turn my printing block over and I am going to try really hard to make it land directly on top of my last print. And again, I'm not going to move it once it's landed. I'm going to just press it down firmly and it should stick. And I'm going to actually take two hands very carefully and flip it over, rubbing the paper from the back. You can apply pressure to the back of the printing block instead to save yourself having to do that flip. It just doesn't work quite as effectively at getting the ink off the printing block and onto the paper. And you can see I now have green on top of my pink and my background is just pink. I'm going to try now printing on top of that fainter print that I did earlier and see how that looks. Join me back here in a minute and I'll show you. So I've printed that one up now. Shall we have a look? Oh, so actually the green shows up better. So sometimes if that first print is quite faint, it can actually be a good thing. We call this, or I call this, a happy accident. Okay, so I've got 2 prints there, and I did say I was going to try and do this as a 3 colour. So I'm going to show you now how to print a final colour, and it's exactly the same as that stage we've just been through there. So I'm going to go away and I'm going to wash my printing plate. It's now clean. Again, I've just wiped it with a damp cloth, dried it with a dry cloth. Right, what I'm going to do now is I want to be left with a kind of darker line, I think, around my leaves, or some darker details. So what I'm going to do is go back into this printing plate and indent more of it. So I'm reducing it. It's a reduction print. I'm taking away more of the plate. So with the end of my pencil, I'm going to make dots or lines on the surface of the leaf. I've added dots to the surface of my leaf. I've done it on one half and not the other, and I'm hoping that will give it the quality of looking like the light is hitting the leaf from one side and there is shadow on the other side. So I've got a darker green on my roller, nice and thick, and again I'm going to apply ink to all the raised areas, and this is nearly as much as I applied it to last time. Rolling in lots of different directions, making sure I'm getting right down into the corners and the whole shape has got ink on it. Again, I'm going to take my print, take my printing plate, turn it the wrong way up and place it down onto my paper. Again, squish it nice and firm, hold it tight, flip it over and apply pressure. And again, have a little peek, has it worked? And a lift. And you can see I've got that dotty texture on one side of the leaf and not on the other. And my leaf looks a lot stronger on that pink background now. And that is the second print. The beauty of this technique is you could have printed that as many times as you wanted. So when you printed the pink, you could have done 10 prints. And when you printed the light green, you could print the light green onto all 10 prints. And then the same with the dark green. This allows for some mistakes, but also you could end up with 10 prints at the end of it.